Welcome to the Portal of Ascension. We're so delighted to be here today with Dan Winter, and we're going to get right into that. Dan is coming to us from France. First, founder of Portal Ascension, Neil Gar, is asking me to make a few announcements just to help you guys know a few of the things that we're up to, which are really exciting. So I'm going to do that briefly. Announcements just to help you guys. There, I got both things going. Let me turn that off. And now I'm going to just share my screen real quick and just give you a little tour of some of the exciting things happening at Portal to Ascension. Now, one of them is we have the Ancient Greece Conference coming up online, and Neil and I are both on that, along with Paul Wallace, Marguerite Riglioso, and Edward Tick. This is going to be a fantastic conference around ancient Greece. And so you can check that out. I think Neil is going to put the link in the chat. And that's coming up on Sunday, August 21. Further down the line, we are going to have the Portal to Ascension Conference in San Diego, April 21st to 23rd. That's ascensionconference.com. We hope you will join us there. It is going to be just loads of fun and an opportunity to once again see each other in person, embodied. So be it, and so it is. We're so grateful to our sponsors. You can check out the site, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that. Early bird tickets are now on sale. Another project we've been doing that Neil thought up is the Portal to Ascension show, Cultivating Community as Humanity Awakens. So sign up here to register free or by donation on Zoom. And we have a bunch of really exciting upcoming shows. Hopefully we'll get Dan on one of these very soon too. That would be really fun, Dan, if you're willing to do a short segment on a variety show.
Looks nice.
Yeah, thank you. And then, by the way, if you don't know who I am, my name is Shariah Dharma. I am a spiritual teacher and author, a healer, mentor, and coach. And I help people learn how to harmonize their life and their world, how to manifest your reality through consciousness, which is very related to what we're going to be talking to Dan about today. And also how to clear your energy field so that you can clear your karma, clear the baggage. Can't take that with you where we're going. So I offer immersions as well as a bunch of free tools, and I'm speaking regularly. So feel free to grab these tools. I believe Neil's putting all that in the chat for you. And so without further ado, I am welcoming Dan Winter, the featured guest of this segment, who has been a teacher of the physics of consciousness for over 30 years. And I always delight in speaking with Dan because the level of energy is so high and the information is so high that it causes me to have upgrades and to comprehend things more at a, what do you want to call it, 5D and beyond level. So as we listen to Dan today, I absolutely invite you to tune in with your source from your heart to feel and hear and know what Dan is saying as a reminder of what we do know already on the higher levels, but he's bringing it in for our greater comprehension in the field right now. Would you agree, Dan?
Absolutely. Thank you. So nice to be here. Yeah, we're going to talk about the heart and the still point and the nature of healing in plasma or charge as perfect compression, fractal implosion, key to healing, and Neg Entropy. Literally, you couldn't get a better squeeze.
Yeah, it's all about the squeeze, right? It's all about the squeeze, the plesio crystals in our physical body, which is the same. I always like to help people comprehend it. Like when people are making these pyramids with resin and stuff like that, they put crystals in them. The resin is actually squeezing the crystals so that they get activated, which is part, kind of the same concept, I believe. Am I right? Am I pointing to the right thing?
Well, it's true that the pyramid is high dielectric, but the crystal is piezo, and the piezo means that it converts a pressure, a stricture, into voltage, which in effect is a way of getting a short wave, getting a long wave into a short wave, which is how, little things like people get into the mind of God, So how the big touches the small is the piezo nature of that crystal. And if the geometry of the harmonic cascade is implosive, that's where the magic begins in the very nature of healing. And we are going to start that conversation today by looking at the nature of the love hug.
Yay.
Yeah, many have seen my slide on that. So there's really only just one slide I prepared. Let me see. Is this going to work if I put this on? Can you see my?
Yep, we got it.
Great. So the point here is on the right, we have Manfred Klein's having measured many thousands of times the shape of the wave of touch. When you touch someone, to say joy, for example, the change in pressure over time has been measured thousands of times, and that's the average. And here's the touch that says anger, actually. And at the bottom is the touch that says, I love you. And I mean, you can actually practice. If you're squeezing someone's hand, you can close your eyes, say, I'm going to squeeze your hand 3 times. Once I'm going to send joy, but then once I'm going to send love. And they can tell the difference.
What is the, hate, anger or hate? Yeah, those would be not so much fun.
Yes.
But the love, I'm trying it with my own hand right now to see if I can feel the difference. Say, love.
So,
love.
but notice that when you touch to say I love you, there's an interesting phenomena where the increase in pressure reaches a maximum much later.
Yeah.
That's actually the point.
I did notice that. So when I did joy, it's like an immediate squeeze. And when I did love, it was kind of like easing into it. And then there's a little squeeze.
Yes. It's literally tantrically delayed. And so looking at, remember, this is from the physics of psychophysics of music in the music literature. Manfred Klein did wonderful work. Then I did an analysis of the geometry of these waves, and this is my work on the bottom, where if you take the beginning and the end versus the point of maximum pressure, you get a simple ratio. Note that for joy, that's 1/6. Very hex and space filling. Whereas for love, literally low phi, long wave phi ratio, the point of maximum pressure is delayed until 0.618 into the duration of the love hug. So the joke was, of course, that if you administer your most academically precise love hug, and then you say to your experimental huggee, and then you say, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? As a test question to see if you have academically rendered your best love hug. And actually, there's good physics there. And that tingle is what we want to discuss. And note also that's the geometry of the change in pressure over time of the perfect birth canal, which is the physics of rebirthing as well. That implosion, the bliss associated with birth, for example, creates an implosive wave. And that's what we're here to discuss, is that implosive wave.
Oh gosh, that is amazing. Now, I heard you say low phi equals love. So love.
Long wave phi ratio.
Low phi, love.
Yeah. And that's where we have we made our point yet? That's the implosive point. So the point is, as you all know, that when you initiate a harmonic series, a wave cascade, based on golden ratio, it creates what's called a caduceus, which in physics is called phase conjugation. You know, it's a long wave that goes to a short wave. It cascades and implodes. And so that's because of something called recursive heterodining. That's non-destructive recursive wave interference. In other words, if wavelength A is 1 and wavelength B is 0.618, then A plus B and A minus B and A times C, they're all golden ratio.
Right.
So golden ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference, and therefore the generalized solution to constructive compression, and therefore implosion. And it's an elegant, but it is, people who understand that for the first time, unlike Einstein, learn why an object falls to the ground, actually.
Well, could you put that in layman terms? I mean, I think, again, we're feeling that in the field, but how would you say that to a 4-year-old who doesn't know all those big words?
Well, when waves cross each other, they interfere. They add and multiply their wavelength and their velocity. That's called heterodining. Okay. And they both add and multiply. So the wave A crosses wave B, and then they have kids. It's called conjugal relations, actually. Conjugal
relations. And so would a hug be it's like the waves that are caused by that hug Is that where that heterodyne takes place?
That's exactly. It is the solution to the problem of a wave does not want to die. It would like to live forever. But in order for that wave to live forever, it has to interfere only constructively. And if that wave wants to interfere only constructively, it has to use golden mean ratio, because all other geometries of wave interference end up with destructive interference. Death for the wave.
Is that why they say the bad guys are out no matter what? It's like, sorry, it's gonna happen.
Well, it's why you don't want to be a square. It's why you, instead of putting a hex on you, you repent and be saved. Because pent is golden ratio.
The five of the pentagram.
That's right. That's right.
Repentance.
Yeah, so the pent sends the spell, the hex fixes it. And that's good physics, actually, because the hex, which is a shadow of a cube, creates octave ratio, square root of 2, which is max destructive wave interference, which causes the wave to have to be frozen in exactly that symmetry, because if it moves, it'll be destroyed. So it's perfect for preservation. So snowflakes are hex, and the hex in the witch's spell freezes that spell because it's perfect for stabilization, but it is the opposite of distribution.
My goodness, that is a revelation.
It doesn't mean that hex or squares are evil. But
right.
It means that if you're building architecture, for example, you use a hex symmetry for a room where you want to stabilize things and in which you may want secrets. Whereas if the room is based on golden ratio and pent, that is a room in which no secrets are possible and which implosion is possible, which is perfected distribution. And so, for example, the hex benzene ring and the hex ice, these are stable, whereas the pent is implosive. And that's a major difference, because one is perfected distribution and the other is perfected stability. And in emotion, for example, joy is planar and space filling, 1/6, you remember, whereas love, lo-fi, long wave phi ratio, uses golden ratio, and that's implosive. And that means we will fall into that implosive center of stillness together, and there will then be no secrets. Does that sound like a prescription for lovemaking?
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. So I'm thinking of, I'm trying to even find it, that image of the David in the pentagram.
Oh, there you go. Exactly.
Right.
Which is Michelangelo's,
yeah.
Universal Man. Well,
Right.
See, the point is that obviously all of biology, certainly all of DNA, is built on golden ratio for one very specific reason, that recursive constructive interference or implosion in the golden ratio, all the way from DNA to the geometry of your arms and hands, is what enables life itself, because life itself is built upon that implosion, because that form of implosion allows charge inertia to converge non-destructively to a central still point. In DNA, it's the hydrogen bond at the center of the ladder rung, which I wrote the new equation to prove. Hydrogen radii are exactly golden ratio times Planck. For that reason, I was the first to prove that hydrogen is fractal, which is, by the way, how and why hydrogen makes gravity. But that hydrogen at the center of every ladder rung bond of DNA is like the implosive lightning zipper up the DNA, embedded in a much longer wave when the DNA recursively braids in the presence of bliss. And it's a thread braided into a string, braided into a rope, into a fat rope. And the ratio of the long wave to the short wave each time is golden ratio. And that's what they call ascension, that the ability of the short wave to embed non-destructively in the long wave, it's a superposed axis of charge spin symmetry, which is the only physics of going to the next dimension.
So I'm hearing orgasm in that, quite honestly.
Good. You have good ears, my dear. Good work.
So when, making life, in other words, it takes you back to this still point, the 0 point of creation, pre-form.
No, precisely. And actually, the orgasm is the body's attempt to squirt its plasma into something that will make it immortal, actually.
Make itself immortal.
It's an appropriate urge to commune with something that will make you immortal, and Tantra can help make you immortal, but Kundalini can too, and they're a form of the same physics, actually. When the plasma
upwards, like the Eastern practitioners point the orgasm upwards, as opposed to downwards into manifestation. how does that?
Well, and that's a pretty good introduction to the physics of Kundalini, which we've made a lot of documentaries about. And what happens there is that at the tailbone, the spine liquid pump actually creates an implosive liquid suction. It really sucks. And so the tailbone actually draws the haploid sperm up the spine liquid pump. And you can measure that in the microwave we have. It's the ATP frequency, 1.91 angstroms. And that's an implosive charge radiance. It feels like lightening up the tailbone, but the measurement originally was done in the sacrocranial harmonics, which are golden ratio multiples of Planck, also the spine liquid pump, which is the breathing, the Mayer wave. And so that spine liquid pump is, it's impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. And when your spine liquid pump becomes massively coherent, there is a squirt gun into the high brain of that sweet implosive microwave. And the phonons cause the ventricle horns to crystallize, called getting horny. And that focuses the phonon wave on the pineal. And that implosion in the piezo pineal spits out a longitudinal wave, which actually squirts through the crown chakra, as it were. And, so Kundalini is a phenomena of implosion, and it starts with a great still point. And the nature of that still point is the subject of this conversation. You're breathing, and eventually your breath from a Mayer wave, 10-second breath, down to perfect stillness. And many people don't understand the physics of why during intense bliss you don't need to breathe.
Right.
And the physics is that breath is only a way of pumping the phase conjugate array, which permits consciousness to embed in the body. But if the array is massively conjugate at a much higher frequency, oxygen pumping is not necessary, actually.
Wow. Okay. This is all blowing my mind. I love it. So now I have an inner esoteric knowledge for many years of study around how so when the energy is going up the spine and then
Ida Pingala.
It goes, yeah. And then it can either go like this back in, or it can go out around in the torus field. So there's pictures of little dragons up at the top, either going this way or going this way. And it's two different phenomena. Could you explain that to us, please?
Well, as the spine liquid pump goes to a climax measurable in the phonon, and in our chakra analysis, iThrive can measure that in heart rate variability, because the spine liquid pump sacrocranial harmonics are the motor of Kundalini, and they're very measurable. Our app for that is ithrive.com, ithrve.com, HRV, And then once that implosion, what it is a microwave nutrient, which causes an explosion of growth in the high brain and a sweet dripping nectar on the back of the tongue. And that is an extreme nourishment for the high brain, which in my case, there was actually a grown bump on the top of my head, which got sharper because of the intense phonon pressure. And I have friends, it's actually fairly common. And that intense phonon pressure is powerful. And it is a rapid, a stairway to spiritual growth, but it's also very dangerous. I mean, because you can become unstable. It burns blood sugar radically. And if you're not ready, it can be very destructive, actually. And you need to know when to stop, quite clearly.
So that's why in the esoteric traditions, they would have gurus and teachers, who are and bring people along a path of progression around these things, rather than trying to just go off and make stuff up on your own.
And then there are the cities. In my case, it was mostly clairaudience. I can hear ancestors fairly often, but my mother was a bit clairvoyant, actually. But the point is that generally, whatever gift you receive, the extent to which you can turn it into service determines how much more you receive.
Nice. Yeah.
But in terms of the biophysics then of perfect squeeze, we want to learn what enables you to get to the still point. Because the theory of this conversation is, you squeeze someone and you say, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? Then if you follow that stillness further into Tantra or Kundalini, you feel a tingle in your spine liquid pump, and you feel lightning in your tailbone. And it's a great high pressure stillness. And what is in the center of that high pressure stillness is our theme for today. It is the voices of ancestors. It is, Akashic records. It is, in physics, that was known before. What was not known before was the electrical engineering. What is actually in the center of that array is called Coherent Longitudinal Emf. It's a pressure wave. So, for example, in the places where the Earth magnetic lines cross, we know, Dodecaecosa, sacred space, Earth grid, we know there was a measured reduction in nuclear critical mass, and telepathy is enabled, and pyramids and all those things are possible, mostly only at the sacred sites, actually. Now, what those are, that is a compression node in a magnetic array, which enables a distribution of charge in what's called longitudinal coherent EMF, formerly called scalar or torsional. And that is DNA radio. That is ancestor memory, and that is the still point. So when you converge at that still point, for example, I went into a French church the other day and I found the magnetic cross point. I was telling this story the other day. And when I closed my eyes, I could actually see down that magnetic line like it's a transparent tube. I could look to see where that magnetic worm had been. I could see the rocks and the water and the ice. I could see the magnetic line was a transparent visual tube to me. And that's because that array itself is the substance of all communication at a distance. It's the substance of all ancestor memory. It's what was called heaven, plains of Sharon. And we don't get in communication with that array unless, and this is the point, unless we learn the skill to access that still point within.
Which I guess, so me as a healer and a clairvoyant and a clairaudient, clairsentient, can see, feel, know ancestors and what's happening for service. I mean, it's like I could do a reading just for whatever, but usually it's for a purpose of spiritual growth and development. So somehow I've managed to learn how to get in that still point, which totally makes sense to me. That's what we do. We use the breath to get in the still point.
Yes. Yes. And the Aboriginals would talk in the same terms, in terms of if your ancestors aren't talking to you, your day is wasted. If you're an Aboriginal, actually. And we now know how ancestor memory works, quite literally. It is a survival library. That DNA has been collecting survival information for 1 billion years, and you can't get in there unless you can do compression well, which is what you need to do in order to lucid dream and take memory through death. So death is a little black hole of implosion that gets you in there only if you are a shareable wave. And the discipline of that array, that library, sometimes called heaven or communion of saints, is the fact, in practical terms, you cannot enter angry. No.
Right. A shareable wave. So you're not hexed at that moment.
Well, and what does that mean psychologically? That it means that the way you would prepare for bliss or death or birth or lucid dreaming is all the same. It would mean that you relax and you find every wave in your memory that's not shareable and sort it out.
Yes, that's what we do. We sort those memories out. We clear the junk from the trunk, as they say.
Yeah, and at an electrical level, that means the moment of death or enter into a lucid dream is a little black hole, actually. And then, in the famous death visions, you see the Heinrich Cuvée-form constant lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, goldenmean.info/immortality. The reason you're seeing that implosive sequence of symmetries during the death visions is well documented, Heinrich Cuvée, is because if you don't do implosion, you don't do a black hole, as Raymond Moody proved with the surgeons, death visions are electrically contagious because you have to do, or, at the moment of death, your whole life passes before you. Why? Right. Because compression is necessary to get you into the array. And that's why if you die, for example, in some accident and you're not coherent, it's really not good. And if you die in a place where the magnetism is messed up, too much electrosmog, it's really not helpful. And all the pictures we see of a beautiful ghost leaving the body at death, and I have them in all my lectures, all of those pictures happened in nature, and not one of them happened in a mental hospital.
Interesting. Yeah. Or
Because
sometimes they get up and they're like, wait a second, what? And
yeah.
Yeah.
Versus when there's beautiful stillness in nature, there's the possibility of getting centripetal at the moment of death and entering that array.
So do
And
they appear to go upwards at then in those cases?
We have pictures. I won't dig them out now, but it's very common. It's Immortality site has it there too. But it's why it's so significant. We know that the ability to lucid dream so nicely predicts whether you will take memory when you die. And we recently have measured lucid dreaming quite, the physics is actually fairly well known. Therify.net, our implosive healing rejuvenation plasma working commercially in 25 countries, is now well known, not just for triggering lucid dreaming, but it's also well known for releasing ghosts, actually.
Okay. So helping them to get coherent and move on.
To get centripetal. That's my bumper sticker. Get centripetal.
Get centripetal.
Yeah, because you see, it requires that centripetal force to enter that array. That's why it's so significant that recently, when the famous SSP experiencer here in France, Jean-Charles Moyen, had so often, his lucid dreams became so vivid that he would bilocate and return frequently with sand between his toes with witnesses. So we know his lucid dreams are portals, actually, which is why the ETs wanted him. So then he needed to document how and why that was happening. So we furnished our famous software, flameinmind.com, brainwave and breath measure. And indeed, in the moments before intense lucid dream becomes a portal, which is the physics of what a Stargate is, you have this extreme coherent alpha, beta, golden ratio, caduceus cascade in the brainwave, EEG. That's why it's called flameinmind.com, actually. But the amount of coherence in his brainwaves before his lucid dream became a portal was such that it was obviously intensely implosive. And the physics is that there's a squeezing process that cascades to the tip of the pine cone of the caduceus, where that's called the Planck Threshold. And at that Planck threshold, the transverse EMF inertia, all our radios, is converted into a much more coherent compressional wave called longitudinal or scalar. And that was called the Ba from the Ka in Egypt, or Kesjan body in Gurdjieff, or rainbow light body in the Tibetan tradition. But that is literally the array that you can enter. And it was the physics of the action at a distance from Tesla, et cetera. And it's also the physics of wireless power and a global grid. It all is literally a longitudinal array. And the compression to get there is the implosion of the still point.
Well, and so thanks for bringing it back around to the EMF or the wireless technology. So is part of the reason why some of the wireless technology that's available now is dangerous to human beings because of this geometry that you're talking about, whereas the new internet, which we all know exists already, from the positive ETs, if you will, or higher beings, advanced beings, would not be harming at all to our fields.
The new internet is the sacred earth grid longitudinal electromagnetic, which is the next dimension, quite literally. That's what it is.
Bring it on, baby.
And the opposite of that is Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, which is unfortunately a very sharp square wave, which is the opposite of implosive, the opposite of consciousness, and is radically responsible for fractionating the attention of humans. It's serious bad news. So when they came here to install the new optical fiber and they turned on the Wi-Fi for just a moment, all the sensitive people in the house immediately felt nausea. And actually something similar for Bluetooth. And we know exactly why, because the frequencies that enable you to inhabit that array are not understood by those who design modern communication, which is actually the opposite of biological communication. So actually those who seek bliss must turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and look for nature, emerge from the electrosmog, metal buildings in the city, and essentially be somewhere where the Schumann resonance is present, which
Yeah.
it is not in almost any city. It is not, except maybe Prague, where your magnetic rose. But in general, the Schumann resonance is not there. The important point people need to know is the Schumann resonance is not a single frequency, 7.83. It's a cascade based on golden ratio, which is implosive and negentropic. It's literally a caduceus, and that's how and why Gaia is self-aware and self-organizing. So when you can read the Schumann resonance, you can predict in advance which tree is going to live or die by measuring whether the Schumann gets there. But what few people know is you can measure the same for people. They can't catch the Schumann.
Well, so what if someone lives in a building where others have it on? I mean, in other words, we got to like completely rearrange our lives basically if we want to be more as coherent as possible, as centripetal as possible.
I mean, initially, the more natural material in your environment, which means high dielectric constant, organic materials, if there's large natural material, organic materials in your environment, it tends to buffer that. A Faraday cage is actually not that helpful because that'll also keep the Schumann resonance out. That's not really the goal. Embedding is the goal. Isolation is not. But the more natural material, the better. And also the basic skill to douse your living space, to find where the magnetic line is, what Castaneda would have called the place of power. Because there the compression is enabled, defining sacred space, and that's where you can recharge.
So you're saying, okay, so I would walk around with either my pendulum or my dowsing rods and find make the intention I'm finding the most coherent spot in the house to sit and work in or something like that?
Yeah, in my case, the more you have bliss experience, the more you can feel the magnetic lines. And so with me, I just walk with my hands at my sides, relaxed, and I will feel a little tingle in my fingertips every time as I walk slowly over a magnetic line. And I can do a pretty good job of dousing a building that way, actually. And so gradually you become very zen. You can have a geobiologist help you, but to know where the magnetic line is strong and alive is critical because that will keep you alive. Castaneda said, if you can't find your place of power, ...
Right, the place of power. See, all of these spiritual things actually have a scientific basis.
Precisely. That's the point. Yes.
What we're wanting to comprehend at this point.
And it's all measurable. Yes. It's a simple physics that if you can locate the center of non-destructive compression, that's why when Korotkov famously followed the Kogita, where they make phone calls to ancestors and measured the fractality of the air, and basically, which is the same thing we measure with life force measure at flameinmind.com, where we can also measure which building will cause a seed or a child to grow electrically. Therefore, which architect deserves to get paid.
Yeah. Well, the ancient architecture of Vastu Shastra, have you studied that? That's got like literal geometry codes in it.
Yes, we taught the physics of Feng Shui many years with Roger Green, and his partner was a Vastu teacher at that time. And those traditions had a lot of truth in them. They said where the valley meets the water, there were all these very good descriptions, and they called it the qi and the flow, the Ming Tang. What they meant was the pools of non-destructive compression, actually. But once the electrical understanding of that is at hand, then you can do something that the Feng Shui and the Vastu teacher cannot do. And what they cannot do is teach you the dangers of electrosmog, because electrosmog was not invented when they were invented. So you have to go beyond the traditional Feng Shui and Vastu and learn the physics to do this correctly. But it was a good introduction.
Very, very fascinating. I love it so much. Now, can we return to the death thing for a moment?
Sure.
So I have seen all those images you're talking about of souls leaving. And I also had a friend who, interestingly enough, he was hit by a car on his motorcycle. And he recalls what he says happened was he hopped out of his body. He was down like in a squat, like a sprinter squat, and he looked around and then he decided to go back in. Meanwhile, a shaman friend of mine was walking down the road, witnessed this happening. And she was like, oh my God, he died. I better help him move on. And then she was like, where'd he go? So she noticed that he went back in. So I thought that was really fascinating. And would you care to comment on that?
Yes, and that gets to a very interesting subject, which what allows the plasma cloud to inhabit the body called incarnating. So, for example, our friend Michael Rice helped, I believe it was a cousin of his, actually return from a near-death experience. And there are things you can do to restore that compression that enables the plasma cloud to re-enter. And a beginning study of that is all these famous, you see the films now, the medical surgeons who themselves had a near-death experience, and they recall where they were outside their body during their near-death experience while the surgery on their body was underway. And some very interesting things emerged, notably that when you're looking at yourself from outside your body, you cannot do it from inside metal. Which tells you that your attention cannot inhabit a metal box.
Okay.
That's important physics. Actually, it's rather childish that in addition to not knowing why objects fall to the ground, scientists cannot teach you what consciousness is. It's quite simple. It is a plasma tornado. That's what it is.
Is that why I didn't like living in an RV?
There you go. You're getting the flavor here, dear. You see, the dielectric constant of the steel and aluminum prevents the capacitance to breathe.
That's what I felt like. I felt like my capacitance was totally not breathing.
Exactly. And see, if we had been able to teach that as physics to the engineers who built that house, they could have learned how not to kill the souls of your kids. And the physics is quite simple. A high dielectric material, usually organic material, allows charge to breathe efficiently. So your aura can breathe through the building you live in and implode. And grandma can go at death very efficiently. Wow. However, if there's a metal roof, you got some issues there.
No metal
because,
roof.
Well, the steel and aluminum prevents the capacitance from breathing, actually. And so it's called, the dielectric constant is basically a name for charge distribution enabled or charge distribution efficiency. So that's why biologic materials are so essential. But you see now what we've learned about near-death experience teaches us why you don't want your children in a steel and aluminum school filled with electrosmog. Right. It ain't good for their plasma, their soul, their aura,
their plasma,
and their ability to lucid dream. So it's actually a simple physics that fits together perfectly. It's very understandable.
It is understandable. And it's also, it's like so crucial to have this education happen right now for our, what we call our awakening and our ascension. Have you heard people talk about the difference between the false light matrix and actually leaving it at death? Like there's different techniques people talk about at death for, not going off with the spirit guides who are masquerading as your ancestors or whoever they're masquerading as, because they're taking you to the reincarnation loop as opposed to helping you be able to move on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it depends on, there's an aspect of extraterrestrial history which is parasitic. An example I would use, when Enlil called himself Yahweh, and then became the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, probably sometimes called the Grim Reaper. In the movie Ghost, you see, or the movie Flatliners, you see being swallowed by a very large plasma parasite. And so how do you get fooled? How do you get fooled? How do you not get fooled and be eaten by a very large plasma parasite?
Right. Exactly.
And the essential issue there is self-empowerment. So in a spiritual tradition based on a parasitic idea that you are the chosen race, and you can tell because you are not self-empowered. You are always taught to obey something external, a God which is outside you. In fact, what the children need to be taught is what used to be called God is the implosive presence of spirit inside you, which is a radiance, a kind of a DNA radio you can plug into. And as you inhabit a larger and larger array, you are no longer subject to parasites. And more precisely, that physics is actually quite simple. When you have, we've told the story many times, but when you have a source, your own source of bliss, then the implosion inside you will toast any wave that's not shareable.
Woohoo!
So
Toast them.
you're going to lose your stomach parasites and your astral parasites as soon as you have bliss. So you can essentially tell a religious tradition. Remember, religion was obsolete on this planet hundreds of years ago because science replaces. It's more beautiful and more loving and more romantic. But if the religion has some element of the tradition that teaches you real bliss process, well, then you can get empowered. But most religions on this planet, self-empowerment is the opposite of what's offered.
Right.
And you should run, not walk, from those religions.
Right. Yeah, anywhere that's teaching you guilt, shame, fear, all that stuff.
Where if they say follow your bliss and find your bliss within, then that's good.
Yeah, then that's the core of the true teaching.
And the real definition of culture, in our view, is, do you have the skill to teach your young people how to have bliss? Yeah. Then you will know if you have culture.
That's amazing. And that bliss comes from that still point and that compression. So was it you who I probably heard a long time ago? I remember hearing about, compression is love, and
yes,
compression is coherent. So it's, and if you think about it, it's what holds you together in form. It's like, it helps you be in this particular
implosive compression is what makes anything negentropic, centripetal, and self-aware, and ultimately blissful. Sadly, on a planet where no scientist can tell you why an object falls to the ground, no scientist can tell you what causes bliss for that reason.
So what is negentropy again? Some of us might get hung up on that word.
Thank you for asking the right question. So entropy means moving toward disorder. Neg entropy means moving toward order or self-organization. Oh. So when Lovelock proved that Gaia is electrically self-organizing, I proved how. When I proved that the Schumann harmonic cascade is golden ratio exponents of Planck, a perfect implosive caduceus in the low frequencies of the planet, we now know how it is that Gaia is self-organizing. And that's called The Origin of Negentropy. And that is the title of my book at fractalfield.com, actually.
Wow. And so with bliss, that is in other words, we can all achieve bliss directly within ourselves through our coherent heart connection in the still point of the center of the center of the center of the center of our heart is where I like to think.
and it is that still point. It's a Mayer wave breath and the heart rate variability. And it shows up, bliss is very measurable in the brain waves. flameinmind.com. It's a golden ratio cascade from alpha to beta to gamma, and it looks like a caduceus, and it is implosive, and it is a flame in the mind. While it's true that we can measure that, flameinmind.com is very good at it. It's easy, it's not even expensive. But because we can measure it does not mean that we can make you have bliss. Right. That is a slightly different thing.
So how does one, so in other words, what are the tools? You've mentioned a number of tools or softwares or places, but what would be the actual process of someone utilizing those to achieve these states, if there is one?
Yeah, remember what bliss is literally the charge radiance that follows implosion. Actually, that's literally what it is. So,
radiance. So that helps make me feel like it's that feeling of expansion and love and energy moving through the
implosion came first.
Implosion came first, which is the inward pressing in.
And the villagers followed St. Francis down into the woods, and they saw the plasma and they called the fire department. That's an example of bliss. It's a real story. And he was in bliss. Well, why was he in bliss? Well, there he was in nature, and his lover was near, and everything was happy, and he was healthy.
Right.
And he knew how to breathe to a still point.
Yeah. And so this brings us back to, embodiment, like to not treat our bodies poorly, like we've got to take stewardship of our physical vessel in order to actually even ascend from here.
Absolutely. Which means It's very simple. So every single decision, this is Astral Hygiene 101, so that every single decision you make, who you kiss and which broccoli you choose, is about, does it add charge to my aura?
Does it add charge to my aura, or does it try to steal it?
Exactly. And
Dampen
that's
it?
called the body polis. And its only definition of politics, actually, which is ability to have bliss for the group, which is,
Right.
I don't know if the Republican Party knows yet, but, bliss is the definition of politics. Oh, really?
Nice. Yeah, I remember you saying that before. That's awesome.
But the body polis is what enabled the beehive to swarm because the coherent plasma became navigable. And that
Okay.
ability to navigate a collective plasma body, literally, ultimately, the ability to lucid dream as a group
Uh-huh.
would then biologically define politics, replacing all need for government. Call me a
Yeah.
radical.
There you go. No, but that's what some of us call self-governance from within. It's like,
Well,
when we're in that state, we wouldn't hurt anyone in that place. We would consider what
actually,
is reasonable.
it is the biologic definition of ability to steer. Now, a beehive will not swarm unless there's royal blood present, because they are the lucid dreamers. So in the lucid dreaming group, those who can lucid dream as a group could navigate the plasma of that group. Now, this does not mean that the concept of government or democracy or politics on our planet is perverse inherently. No, but it means that until governments realize that nourishing the bliss that defines sustainability and immortality for all humans is the climax function of government, then once a government understands it, then they could make a decision of whether or not the vaccine is good for you. Until then, they don't have any criteria upon which to make the decision. Did it feed your aura? In Egyptian, that was called fa'atun, from we get the word fatten.
Fatten. Fa'atun. Fatten. Fa'atun.
Yeah. And you see, to feed Atun, the sun god, actually simply means, did it feed your aura?
Did it
So
feed your aura?
the point is that your aura is measurable. GDV is one example. And so you can teach your kids why not to use recreational drugs because of holes in the aura by measurement. Well, the same thing then could apply to all decisions you make are based on whether your aura is growing or not, which is another variation of follow your bliss. And
so the sneaky dark side tactics, whatever you want to call that, from the wayward siblings, is to cause people to think, oh, bliss is underrated, or you need all these other experiences to have bliss. So it's like a false bliss. Like you have to have these drugs and these stimulants and this over sexualized energy and this over stimulation that is actually ends up being the thieves.
Yes. And a practical example of that would be young people addicted to marijuana. In the long run, the measurement proves a shortening of attention span. And attention span is the soul. That's what it is. It's ability to ride the long wave. That's what the still point is. It's literally attention span. So anything that shortens your attention span is by definition the opposite of what you want. Wow.
That's really, really interesting. Now, what does this have to do with literally like the teaching around, well, like, so the teaching for men not to release their sperm because they want to regenerate their bodies, in terms of like the actual orgasm, like bliss equaling orgasm. Bliss can also be non-sexual bliss. It can be like just the bliss of the being, but this whole notion of not allowing that charge to leave through the lower chambers in order to preserve it for preserving the aura. Could you talk about that a little bit?
You know, as a double Scorpio, I love to talk about these things. No, in my case, if I may say humbly, when my Kundalini first started, a double Scorpio, I was still a virgin, actually. So I had plenty of conserved sexual juices, which may or may not be helpful. It will increase the pressure, and the pressure needs to be there in order to move up. So if there is, when you're young, too much releasing of the sexual juices, it will never build the pressure. And that is clearly not good. Right. On the other hand, if it's never released and it's stuck, that's not good either. What is obviously needed is a flow through pumping action. And we now know what the stuff is. The stuff of orgasm and bliss is a cohered ultraviolet plasma field, literally blue fire, because the media of all climax cellular biophysics is coherent ultraviolet. It is the driver. And when that coherent ultraviolet reaches the tailbone, there's a choice, up or down, just as you say. And if it's continuously being released downward, it won't build pressure. But if it's being released into something that creates creativity, at least there's something. But so there are times, especially when young, it's best to not release it too much because you need to build the creative juices. If the child has creative outlets, there won't be promiscuity. But if there are but if there's no creative outlet, there's much more likely to be promiscuity. And that's the physics of the distribution of blue fire. Now, it is true that in my case, there was an explosion up this, and I had the whole raging, burning fire Kundalini, major drama 30 years ago, and, eventually learned to deal with it. But, and that was a conservation in my case. But I'm not saying that's good for everyone. And I am saying that Kundalini is dangerous, can be dangerous. And we do have good documentaries on that, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. But and then as you grow older, however, there are dangers to conserving the sexual juices too much as well, as you all know.
Could you talk about that for a moment?
Well, stuck in the prostate would be an example.
Energy getting stuck. So
that's right.
So how do people get training on these things these days? I mean, it's just not available, or it's twisted or distorted. It's like
it's twisted or distorted. Even the urge to be sexual when you see someone's skin is pink is an urge for plasma communion. And there can be a mutual service rendered by Tantra. And it's true that Tantra with a younger person will tend to immortalize the older person. It's practical physics because it's sustainability of plasma. But once you've found your own source of bliss, you become the attractor. That's the simple physics. That's why the discipline is always to find your bliss, which has a lot to do with connecting your sexual energy with whatever it is that you believe is your highest level of service, which we know will help you live without food.
Right. And then there's so many distortions around that with the sexual energy, especially sexual, with younger people, the whole really seriously negative stuff that's coming out about what's been going on behind the scenes. Like, obviously, there's some seriously destructive things.
Yes, the pedophilia, et cetera. And when you realize that you have an adult generation, most of whom cannot generate critical inertia in their own plasma, being a parasite is the only thing left for them, actually. And the fundamental physics here is that until you have your own source of bliss, which is your only own source of charge, you are, in effect, by definition, a parasite.
Wow.
Which is why it's more and more critical to find the place of charge, learn to go within and find your bliss. Otherwise, the alternatives ain't good.
Right. And so what is your advice for people on how to do that in their own lives?
Well, it's the old story. We had in our book, Spiritual Hygiene for Conscious Kids, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. The book is entitled Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Mortality. And it was for young people originally, but we divided the hygiene for bliss into 4 categories. It was diet. It's all the obvious things, live food and live water. And, ask that corn before you eat it, when was the last time you experienced genetic diversity? And you're looking for chi in everything you eat, But, and then in terms of kinesthetic aspects of bliss, it was to learn the physics of why a certain arc angle calculus of curvature in movement would cause your finger to tingle. Remember, the Gurdjieff said you cannot start the bliss gymnastic until after you can put a tingle in your baby finger with your attention. Once your attention can make your baby finger tingle, then you're ready to learn sacred gymnastic, because there's critical inertial implosion, critical mass in your attention. And so as you learn which movements cause that, they called it feeling, which we now know is implosive capacitance, sometimes called the quality of grace or chi. And so the ability to cause implosion and movement. So for most young people, some form of the kinesthetic of bliss is the most useful tool, whether it's yoga, sacred gymnastic, or Gurdjieff tensegrity. There's thousands of different ways to do this, but some disciplined kinesthetic movement. Another thing to bear in mind is most young people do not have a critical mass of their own attention's electrical force. Remember, when you grow up, you can put enough attention here to make it feel like a vice. That's electrical centripetal force in your attention. But when you're young, you don't have that critical mass. So in order to feel anything when you're young, you may need a group. And then the group does this kinesthetic together. If you watch the closing scenes of Meetings with Remarkable Men with Gurdjieff, the bliss was so palpable it burnt the film. It was electric.
My gosh. So that's like the Gurdjieff has so we're talking about like the Sufi dances of universal peace, or we're talking about the Gurdjieff movements,
anything like that, anything.
Group experience of yoga, or a group of experience of what you're calling sacred gymnastic, which I hadn't heard of that before.
Which is the Gurdjieff term, yes. I was a teacher, or at least the piano player for.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. Yeah,
Charlestown, West Virginia, claymont.org.
Amazing. So sacred gymnastic is the Gurdjieff term.
Yeah, that's right. Forming twos, first obligatory. These were a tradition, and this was all very explicitly designed for the geometry of charge implosion, literally bliss. That's what D. Hartman was up to with the music with Gurdjieff, the octaves in the seven. It was all about implosive capacitance. And once you begin to feel that, and actually I have to say that after some months of that work is when my Kundalini began.
Interesting. Actually. Okay. So that's when it started to rise up, and then bring forth all your karmas so you can deal with them and all that fun stuff that you went through.
So we were talking about the categories for bliss. So now we've had the diet, we have the kinesthetic, and then there's the environment, that if you're spending all day, every day in dead air in a metal building, your aura probably ain't going to implode.
Right.
You got to find the power place and the fresh air, and probably some nature and something to, take a retreat, whatever it takes. But to find your power place, hopefully in nature. So it's certainly at a minimum, you need some place where you can go where you can recharge regularly. Probably nature is space. Yes.
Otherwise, you loop back in. That's where that cycle of reincarnation, of looping back into the same patterns, the same energies, and all that happens.
Yes, exactly. And maybe a fourth category we would describe as intention, where you learn gradually that every thought you think, which is not shareable, depletes your capacitance. So the definition of eureka is actually the pure principle, which is discovering something that serves all of survival. And it's precisely that will get you through death.
Interesting. So not shareable could mean like thoughts of anger, resentment, jealousy.
But it's even more than that. It's realizing that the collective unconscious is continuously seeking survival memory, a library which enables immortality, which is literally just pure principle. And so eventually you begin to think about pure principle only. And that's, for example, what made me an inventor. But really, when you think about pure, what we say is a eureka moment, it's the implosion that results from tripping over a pure principle in your awareness.
Thinking of pure principle only. So contemplating the nature of what we call God, which is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Would that be
But those terms are too vague. To understand what we mean by omnipresent is to understand a wave array that is implosive, enabling distribution, the physics of heaven, planes of Sharon, pure principle, pure electrical wave mechanics. That's my idea of what pure principle is. And so once you begin to dwell on what is essence, for example, you had a messy day and there was a bunch of people angry at a bunch of other people, and what a mess. And so then you're about to try to go to sleep that night and you're trying to distill, well, what was shareable about that day? And the fact is, until you figure that out, you may not be able to die well, actually. So everything that was not shareable about that day, you can easily let go of because you know it did not have anything to do with pure principle or sustainability. And only the parts of that day where nature was trying to show you pure principle, that enters into immortality. That's called essence.
And so that's why when we go to bed at night, it's like there's exercises we can do to go
Exactly.
back to our day, remember everything that happened in reverse, and then also forgive or re-envision, revision, revise, re-envision the day, do the forgiveness work.
And the way the Gurdjieff people do that is you play your day backwards like it's a movie.
Yeah.
And if you can do that without interrupting the movie, that means you've digested the memory.
And then it's not sitting there like an undigested bit of potato.
That's right. Then you're ready to sleep. You're ready to compress. You're ready to implode, ready to die, ready to have bliss.
Yeah, like
ready to enter
Scrooge.
stillness.
I often did the play A Christmas Carol when I was young, and so they talk about Molly's ghost coming to Scrooge, and he's like, is this really Molly, or is it just a bit of undigested potato?
Or undigested memory, which means
memory, yeah.
a pain that was not shareable. You know, the Andromedan mystic Phaseus said, the only pain you feel is the love you withhold, which simply means failure to embed.
Oh, that is so beautiful. So Scrooge had a lot of memories that he had not digested yet, and that's
right. But the play is the thing in which will capture the conscience of the king. And as we often say in Shakespeare, the theater is tetracubic, which is how you phase conjugate. And if you see the emotions of all persons from the right perspectives, at the end of the play, you consume perspectives and you feel everyone's body.
I got bliss on that. I got a total bliss rush on that. Wow, that was cool. So yeah, okay. So my son would call that expanding, making your universe bigger. I see it as like continually including more and more and more perspective, so that we're not.
That's right. Perfect embedding. Exactly.
Perfect embedding.
Which is literally in heart rate variability science, the immune system's health is defined as embeddability, which is harmonic inclusiveness in heart rate variability. The healthy heart is a fractal heart. So literally compassion is measurable by how many harmonics are in your EKG. Literally. realheartcoherence.com. And that is the moment at which you discovered compassion, when you can feel the outside as if it's the inside.
See, now
it's implosive.
Physiologically, I literally, that whole little, whatever we just did there, now my spine is straighter, my aura is bigger. I feel more aligned.
Embedded.
Yeah. So these
Very
spiritual principles coming out of this, like do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, like they're very, very, very simplified, but it's all pointing to the same physics of consciousness that we're talking about.
Exactly. And that as you feel others, then you begin to actually feel deeply intuitively that yes, you need to be in your highest level of service, but your highest level of service doesn't mean you have to serve everyone you see. No, your intuition tells you who you can serve deeply and who you cannot, really. Wow. But when you have that intuition that this is a person I can serve, it's strongly recommended that you follow that intuition.
Right, because then that is going to allow you to actually
to make the magic.
To when we practice something, we get more of that ability.
The highest level of service. And so the collective unconscious is in the business of making that magic if we relax enough and listen.
Wow. Okay, mind blown again, Dan Winter. I love it. I love talking with you. Thank you so much.
It's been fun. Well, you know, the relationship we are making between the fractal physics of consciousness and the fractal physics of gravity tells us one more thing. It tells us, you know, we've all been saying, well, we feel cheated because Tesla didn't give us free energy and global wireless power. But at the same time, until we understand what free energy and global wireless power is, which is the precise physics of consciousness we're discussing right now in that global grid, we don't deserve what's called free energy or global wireless power because we don't understand the psychology of that. So when, as in South France, they say where all the ancient stone fences were broken, at that moment, plasma did not circulate. Fertility went down and oops,
Oh,
we had a
wow.
drought.
Oh
So it's
my
failure
God.
to circulate charge because the top-down view of our cities and land does not look like a rose. So until we know how to make that array work, what we used to call heaven, we don't deserve free energy or wireless power because we don't know how an array works. We need to learn the spiritual lesson in order to learn the electrical lesson.
So you're saying that the old stone walls with all those crystal, granite crystalline
They
rocks.
were a map of the magnetic lines, and that magnetism circulating like the rose is the only way to make rain. Hello.
Hmm. Well, I had this idea of a feng shui that followed the flower of life instead of
Well, the flower of life is a tetracube, and when the tetracube is stable, there will be born in the center where the cube tilts at 32 degrees and goes from hex to pent, and the cube embeds in pent dodeca. That is the climax of the flower of life, the real meaning of Merk Abba, actually, and so it's the moment at which it goes from hex to pent that you actually attract rain.
So you have the 6 around the edges, but then that one in the middle takes it to the pent.
What it is the tetracube becomes stable, which is called the flower of life. After it's stable, then if you look at the chin angle of the Sphinx, 32 degrees, you tilt that cube up 32 degrees and spin on that new axis, and it becomes pent dodeca, the 5 cubes in the dodecahedron. And that is the visualization you do to go from the hex flower of life to pent implosion. That's the last step that was regarded as dangerous. It's dangerous in the sense that if you're not ready to implode, if you ain't shareable yet, you will come back dizzy. But until you're ready to do that, you ain't ready for bliss or death or lucid dreaming.
Or by location.
Yeah, that's the astral hygiene of it. So the point is, in the Earth grid, here in South France, there are places where there are actually valves magnetically in the land where they would switch the magnetic current down the vein into the valley, controlling the rain and the fertility as a magnetic plumbing, actually. And this was the ancient way of controlling fertility and rain making. We have a very good article, goldenmean.info/rain on that, goldenmean.info/labyrinth, goldenmean.info/geobiology. We have a lot of literature on that. But as the world is suffering from drought right now, until people learn, one little climax story. So we were doing our advanced 4-day conference in Tremorty off Cannes in South France. Beautiful site. And we were putting in a labyrinth. That was our exercise for the day. And the older people from the community came, and we put the paramagnetic stone, we doused the magnetic line, and we laid the paramagnetic, we made this labyrinth, and we walked the labyrinth. We all felt the tingle in the presence. And the elementals went crazy. They hadn't been touched for decades, right?
Wow.
Well, that night, there was the biggest storm in Tremorty in 10 years. Did they get rain? Way too much, but this is the physics of labyrinth making, actually. Rain making is about the permission to touch. So as we learn the lesson of why the spread of patriarchy caused the spread of deserts, it has been measured. That is a very good physics lesson. The reason the spread of patriarchy causes deserts to spread, you have extensive evidence. It's measurable. It's science. goldenmean.info/desertify. So James DeMayo's work. So the point is, when a child looks at a cloud, focuses, and puts a hole in the cloud, the reason is the happy child standing wet in the mud, their attention is centripetal. And that makes implosion, which teaches the water vapor how to touch, called a droplet. It's the definition of Christos, to crystallize. Learn how to share. So when the water vapor became the droplet in the cloud because the child focused, that's rain making. And if there ain't permission to touch, no rain.
Amazing. So again, I mean, this is hearkening to the fact that there was a civilization here where the human beings were awakened to these things previously.
Matriarchies were wet, coming of age in Samoa. Patriarchies, not so much.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And yeah, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. This is the goddess.
Well, permission to touch means that young people who have no permission to touch, urge to touch, frustrated, becomes anger by definition. That's called the origin of football. This will become an ad for the National Football League right now, that that the reason young people destroy their spines and their brains by playing football is because there is no permission to touch. It doesn't mean you need promiscuity for young people, but there need to be rituals within which young people are enabled to touch in a constructive way. And if that does not exist, then not only do you have the death that's football, but you have no rain.
Right. Well, so what would that look like? That would look like perhaps the group sacred gymnastics where people are holding hands or dancing together, and there's certain that
You know,
kind of thing. Is that
and coming of age in Samoa was touch permissive, and there was lots of rain.
Yeah.
Margaret
Yeah.
Mead, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. So actually, permission. And you see, if there's a discipline in the dance for the young people, then the touch is all constructive.
Yeah.
It's constructive wave interference.
Right.
So until there's a way to teach people to touch constructively when they're young, they will grow up with these perversions.
Right. And so, yeah, so the distortion around touch, sex, promiscuity.
And we did a major analysis of the origin. On our planet, the origin of all religions pretty much is fear of women, which is actually fear of touch. And we now know where that came from. The more parasitic ETs were all matriarchies who were involved in those early, the Anunnaki. The Pleiadians were a matriarchal. The gray hive mind is matriarchy, and the Draco queen these are matri. And our ancestors, the Anunnaki, were afraid of those women. And that's why fear of women is the origin of most of the religions on this planet, which is how I began to study ET history. Fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood.
I'm getting bliss on that too, which tells me there's some truth there, but I hadn't thought of it that way before. I mean,
why were they afraid of the women?
Say that again.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I had heard that the queen, the queen bee of those civilizations, knew the power of females, so that they intentionally started dismantling the power of the feminine here in order to cause this harm that you're talking about.
We believe that Tagat and Pleiadian are 80% female now because they resorted to parthenogenesis in their matriarchy. Actually, there was some reason to fear these matriarchies, but the matriarchy of the hive queen of the Draco and the Greys, it's a red queen and a white queen, actually. This fear was real. And the Anunnaki came from Pleiades. But this is another rather long story. But the point is, I started my study of history by trying to determine where the fear of women came from on this planet. And I realized it's ET.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Now, I think you did another talk that was broadcast recently on that. So
many. There's 300 films, 2 million views. YouTube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field. There's a lot, the ET origins. But the point for here is the matriarchy was in fact touch permissive originally, and actually in the Draco ancestry, they were androgynous originally. It's when they went to replicate sexually, if you read the Thiuba legend in the French tradition, that the war of the sexes began. And it's very instructive that the Aboriginal marriage law, and actually the caste system, but the Aboriginal marriage law specifically is straight Draco. And most of the reason Australia is a desert is because of the curses, because the men tribe and the women tribe had a separate language for their shaman, separate, and that is straight Draco.
And so that's non-shareability.
And when they did ritual to heal the anger of the men tribe and the women tribe across Australia, huge rainstorms followed them every time. Malcolm Borg Ward.
Absolutely amazing. Wow, that is just fascinating. So yes, integrating and digesting all this information is
permission to touch.
Yeah.
which just means how are you going to teach your kids to do the dance so they learn to touch constructively?
Right. Yes. And yes, positively, non-harming, beneficial, benevolent.
Then they might not need football, and that could save their
Right.
back and their brain concussion. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to Britain. We have a stiff upper lip. Why? We only hug our dogs and our horses. Sorry, I didn't mean to be sarcastic.
Oh my gosh.
You know how the upper lip got stiff? It's because mother said, don't cry. That's physics.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Suppress your emotions and your feelings.
And what does Barrett on mean? Birthplace of Anunnaki. That could be a clue. Britain.
Merit on Britain. Yeah.
That's what Lawrence Gardner concluded. Marathon, Britain.
Yeah. And so you're mentioning, and we can all go and look up some of your other longer talks on this, but generally a lot of people think the Anunnaki were mixed with the Draco and came from Sirius. So you're saying you believe they came from Hades, and were
Enki's
from
mother
our-
was Syrian, but the Anunnaki were a cross of the Draco and Gray. Actually, I think Elena Denon got much of that right in her Gift from the Stars, and I've been making a lot of films with her. But the Anunnaki Draco wars are not the same as the Orion wars, which are mostly with the Greys, what Elena calls the Khmer. But both races have been hugely involved and parasitic here on Earth. And in order to avoid the very insidious parasitic Nebu Gray Draco agenda, the Galactic Federation and the Supergalactic Federation here have kicked out the Greys and Nebu from the whole solar system, but they still insidiously try to sneak themselves in here by hybrid breeding programs.
Right.
And we need to become aware of the insidious nature of the Greys and Eisenhower's treaty. That's a whole nother story. Fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. But there's a beautiful story to that, Maury, which, oh, sorry, this one. But the beautiful story to that, Maury, is why did those ETs want or need us in the first place? Because our DNA is what they don't got. And the part of our DNA that they don't got is the part that makes a soul and a lucid dream. And those are the only ones they abducted, the lucid dreamers. Why? That implosive coherence in the DNA that results from bliss, actually. So there's the vaccine to the Orion Wars story right there, is if you can teach your child how to have enough bliss to become a lucid dreamer, then you won those Orion Wars. Literally, that's what it's about. And when the Supergalactic Federation, led by Thoth, the Cedar races, the 9, arrived back here in 300 starships off Ganymede, you know what they're here to do? Just that.
Just which?
Celebrate when the human race realizes they can be a vaccine for those Orion Wars when they learn what it is to make a soul,
right?
Which is how a Caduceus called Hermes, the leader Thoth of the 9, the Cedar races. It's hermetically sealed. So when you can teach the kids how to have a soul, how to have a lucid dream, how to take memory through death, then we've succeeded. It's what you call ascension. It's actually that coherence, which starts with teaching kids how to get a coherent enough aura to have bliss, enter that still point, and start to lucid dream. And then they steer those magnetic lines like they're family pets. And then the parasites cannot enter.
They can't even come in. They can't even catch at that point. So it's like having an infection, like a global.
That's right. It's literally an infection. And the infection is teaching us that our immune system is literally whether we have a tribe of lucid dreamers. Interstellar parasites not welcome.
Right. And does this to you relate also to the AI stuff? Like that they're beholden to those Greys?
Yeah, the AI problem is precisely not knowing what it is to have a soul. That is the AI problem in essence. When DNA implodes, propagates longitudinally, heaven, planes are surrounded. At that moment, when you know you're going to take memory through death because you can lucid dream, that is the moment you have a soul. And that will never, ever, ever, ever happen inside a computer. It will never, ever, ever happen inside a quartz crystal or any crystal oscillator without DNA. So literally, only when we can teach our kids the physics, and I mean the physics of what it is to have a soul, at that moment will our culture know what it is not to be sucked into AI. Until then, every other damn AI gadget they bring in here to eat the souls of your kids, we're susceptible until we can teach at university level what it is to have a soul.
Wow. So now this is where everybody needs to get their Ethernet cables out and plug their computers into hard Wi-Fi instead.
That's right.
The hard box instead.
I'm running on Ethernet here. My Wi-Fi is off. My Bluetooth is off. And when it comes on, I can feel it, man.
Wow.
That's just the beginning. But that kind of hygiene is the beginning of our race learning what a soul is. Teaching our kids how to stick Bluetooth in their ears is soulless.
Yeah. Soul eating, even, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. So what is the first step for somebody who's just heard this and had their mind blown and wants to start integrating more?
Well, start practicing the basic steps of hygiene, the basic steps of diet. Find some sacred movement that makes sense. Begin to teach the kids, and gradually aim to move to nature. Actually, that's I hate to put it any other way, but whoever invented cities should apologize. It was a mistake. No, that's not really true. No, a fractal city is a possibility, but it basically doesn't exist on this planet.
Right. Because they don't have the knowledge yet of how to build them correctly.
The architecture of a city is the architecture of an implosive crystal. Originally, the magnetic map of Prague was a rose, but now.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Is there anything else you want to share today before we close this out?
And the happily ever after is?
Yes.
Well, the happily ever after is actually, now that we know what people are for, in spite of Kurt Vonnegut, we know what people are for quite clearly. It's a very simple electrical lesson. We can make the centripetal force that steers stars. All our ancestors were called sun gods for very good reason.
And so we know how to do these things deep inside ourselves and in our ancestral memory and in our DNA.
Absolutely. It's a matter of relaxing. But then we need to get to places where our body can build charge. Otherwise, we won't get there. Places and diet and hygiene and kinesthetics and action to follow your bliss.
So are you a live foodist? Do you eat only living food?
Oh, well, I taught that for years, and my partner Valerie says, if you can't do it, teach it. Well, I'm close. No, I try to have mostly salad. I'm mostly vegetarian. I eat a little fish. See, I have a super fast metabolism, so that's my excuse for eating a little fish occasionally. But
your Kundalini went and burned. Get your blood sugar all burned up.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. But the live food advice, I mean, essentially, the reason the DNA in the wheat and corn gives you immediate mucus is because it is screaming in pain from hundreds of generations of monoculture. So that the DNA in that wheat and corn gives you immediate mucus because it's your body's saliva saying not self, because there's pain in there. Whereas the ancient blue corn of the Hopi, you could sing the right song and it would germinate. It was a family pet. But now,
wow. What about
that's why genetic diversity.
What about like the forbidden rice, like the black rice?
There are some ancient grains that still have some genetic diversity that you can talk to the DNA like a shaman, but there's not much of that left.
What about the einkorn? Do you think there's any hope for that, or is that still too far gone?
There's, in Germany, they have a few genetically diverse grains. There's even a few wheat stocks in German that are still genetically diverse. And in France, they call it petit épeautre. There's a little bit of life left. But most of the grains on this planet are, the corn and wheat that you can buy in most any store is serious poison. I'm sorry. It just is. It's really bad. And most of the seed oils are really not good for you. Right. Most of them, truly.
Oils
you need
in general are, unfortunately.
Pardon?
Oils in general are not really good for us, despite.
Yeah, the raw olive oil, there's a few that are okay, but most of the seed oils are serious bad news. It's so tricky. So in the modern American grocery store, 99% of that stuff is going to destroy your aura, unfortunately. It's just the truth. Right. So, unless till you get to the farm, because genetic diverse. When we were young, I had this genetic diverse garden from the Seneca Indians in Western New York, and we had 7 different color potatoes and squash and tomatoes. It was put in by the Iroquois and the Seneca, and my friends, we ate those vegetables, and they swore they never again would need LSD. But seriously, the dreams you have from you eat live genetic diversity tells you that DNA is happy.
Amazing. So that's heirloom seeds.
Exactly. Heirloom seeds. Yeah.
Of that kind of stuff we need to get and start cultivating our own gardens wherever we are.
Exactly.
Start taking back our food supply.
That's our happily ever after for this Lassie episode.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's just been amazing. So fractalfield.com, right?
Yeah, fractalfield.com for our major sites, and then therify.net for the plasma work around the world, and flameinmind.com for the beautiful bliss work. And the Flame in Sound software, the world's most powerful bliss binaural sound, at flameinmind.com, which is available separately, very inexpensively, will now be driving 5 new implosive healing technologies: Quantify, Therify, Plasmafire.com, 5vibes.com, and wait till you see our new piezo green healer. We have a bunch of new, and all these are based on making the electric field of implosion. We can reduce pain so quickly. It's beautiful.
Wow. Now, and so is there one site where we can go to and see all these links?
Well, Therify.net has most of the plasma tech, and Plasmafire, PHIRE.com, has the new plasma ball systems. And there's a relaunch of FractalU.com happening now, which will have all that stuff as well.
Beautiful. And so just don't listen to the sound things with your Bluetooth headset. Right? You're going to say no to
exactly that would be, yeah. See, Bluetooth is very sharp square wave, and it really does, it weakens the attention. You can use it for a little bit, and even the brainwave thing, we use it a little bit, but don't leave it on.
Right. Well, once again, thank you so much, Dan Winter. I just want to invite everyone, if you wish, take a nice deep breath. Attention through our source connection, through our heart, to integrate and digest all this information in whatever way is truly for our highest good, to receive further activations and downloads that are absolutely correct for us to access this cellular memory, this DNA memory, this ancestral memory that will help us all to progress forward into the habits, the thinking, the connections, the choices that will help us actuate what Dan has delivered here today on behalf of ourselves and the well-being of all. And so breathing into that, we give thanks, we give thanks, we give thanks. So be it. So it is.
That's a shareable wave. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Many blessings.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye. Bye.